Good morning. I think we'll get started because Richard has a great program for us and we don't want to run out of time. So, my name is Woody Kingman and I am honored to represent the Blake Alumni Board, which puts on these events known as Breakfast at Blake. Many of you have been here before and you know we always have some great speakers from the alumni and greater Blake family. So we have a unique one today. Every other year the Otis Environmental Program brings in a speaker, and today we will hear from Richard Preston. But before he comes to the podium, I just want to remind you that we have a neat program a month from now on May 15th. David Mortensen will speak, and he's the class of '84 and a current parent, and he will give a presentation entitled 21st Century Engineering, Design, and Construction. And if that sounds kind of too, construction-y and stuff like that, it also goes on to say it's a sneak peek at the new Vikings stadium, so that'll be a lot of fun. Well, let me bring up a kindergarten teacher and an upper school teacher, Vince Gedeke and Dan Truckman, who run the Otis Environmental Program, and they will introduce today's speaker.
Well, we're so glad all of you could be here today. We're really excited to welcome Richard Preston as part of our Otis Environmental Author Program. It's a great program that both of us have been coordinating for. This will be our fourth author visit, and it was set up in memory of Phil Otis, who is the son of the Margaret and Angus Wordle, who are Northwood Blake alums. In their son's memory, he was at Bates College, just to give you a little context for the program and how it started. The summer before his final term at Bates, Otis worked as a student ranger in Mount Rainier National Park, and late that summer, Phil and another ranger died trying to rescue an injured climber, and this program was set up, like I said, by Margaret and Angus Wordle in his memory. He had a passion for the outdoors and caring for the outdoors too. And so it's been wonderful to be one of the coordinators of this program over the past 4 visits, because we've seen the authors come to the school to work with the students, kind of broaden their minds to new ideas about the environment, important environmental issues, and seeing the kids kind of take that on and learn about these complex issues that they're going to be facing when they're older, in the world. And so just planting those seeds of awareness early on, kindergarten up through 12th grade. And so it's just a wonderful program that kind of carries forward Phil's passion and care for the environment. And so we are welcoming our 9th author overall, Richard Preston, and he is a regular contributor to the New Yorker, and he has written many nonfiction and fiction bestsellers. He's focusing on his book, The Wild Trees, because it connects nicely with the program, and so we are looking forward to hearing from him this morning. So I welcome Richard Preston.
Thank you, Vince. It's great to be here with you this morning. I understand that some of you are Blake parents, and you may in fact have a graduating senior this year, and this week they've been hearing from college applications. So when I was talking to the upper class yesterday morning, I asked, I'm a graduate of Pomona College, and I asked the seniors, how many of you have applied to Pomona? And I heard this groan from the audience. Pomona is hard to get into, and apparently quite a few students had applied and hadn't gained entrance. So I said, well, I'm in your club. I was rejected from Pomona College when I applied. In fact, I was rejected from every single college I applied to, right across the board. I had an indifferent high school record that included an assault against a teacher, for which I was nearly expelled from public school. You have to do a lot to get expelled. Now, I didn't hurt the guy, but I did push him, and that was definitely an assault. So, at any rate, I decided that I really wanted to go to Pomona anyway, although I'd been rejected. So I had to explain to the students what a collect call is, because they don't know that anymore. And I made a collect call to the Dean of Admissions at Pomona. And the operator said, this is Dick Preston is calling from Massachusetts. Will you accept the charges? And the dean said yes, and I explained to the students that this was about $20 in those days. And I said to the dean, hi, this is Dick Preston from Massachusetts. I just was calling. I know you guys have rejected me, but I was just wondering if you have a policy where you, like, change your mind. And the dean was like, are you kidding? You're not joking, right? And I said, no, I'm serious, And he said, well, no, we don't have any such policy. So I said, well, okay, my next question is, what do you think the chances are that your policy would change in the near to intermediate future? And he said there was no chance. So I said, you mind if I check in with you in a little while? And he said, well, no, it's okay. So a week went by, and then I called him again, and I reversed the charges. Again, Dick Preston calling from Massachusetts, will you accept the charges? And the guy did. I called him 4 times. A month went by. And on the 4th phone call, he kept accepting the charges. He was out about $100 by this point. And he finally said, you're on the waiting list. And that's how I got into Pomona College. So the student, and then I explained to them that I actually ended up graduating near the top of my class, summa cum laude. So it was a good bet they made on me. And I said, regardless of your luck in applying for colleges, be persistent and never give up. And I think they liked the message. Now, okay, on to the Redwoods. So I wrote 3 books on the subject of dangerous viruses that have really gruesome descriptions of humans dying of things like Ebola with blood streaming from every opening of their body. These books were very popular with teenagers, along with a lot of other people. But I got a little tired of writing about viruses, and I was just looking for something to do. And I was surfing the net, and I found out about a school for climbing trees in Atlanta. So I went down there, and I learned how to climb trees with ropes and gear. You can see my gear here. This gear that I have on display is my Redwood climbing kit. And it consists of about more than $2,000 worth of equipment. And it weighs quite a bit, but you have to have all of it when you're up in the Redwoods and moving around, because you may be up there for as long as 8 hours at a stretch, swinging on ropes, dangling on ropes in midair as much as 30 to 35 stories above the ground. So think about doing that in Midtown Manhattan or downtown Milwaukee, just hanging on ropes up in space for hours on end. That's what it's all about. So at any rate, I began climbing trees with our children. Then I began hearing about, and our kids also climb trees to this day with me. It's a lot of fun. It's very accessible to young people. Then I began hearing about the coast redwoods and the scientists that climb in these trees. Now, the coast redwood tree is a remarkable organism. It's a beautiful, charismatic organism. The coast redwood tree, Sequoia sempervirens is its species name, is the tallest individual living organism on the planet. The tallest redwoods are 350 feet plus, so 35 stories plus. The tallest is Hyperion, which was only discovered in 2006. So it's 379.2 feet currently. It's growing at a rate of about 1/2 a centimeter per year. The widest is the Lost Monarch, and nobody knows how old they are. The estimate is 2,500 years for the oldest individuals, but they may be more along the lines of 5,000 years. Nobody knows. So trees as old as the Parthenon. They live in rainforest along the coast of Northern California. That's why they're called the coast redwood tree. This is extremely dense rainforest where you get more than 100 inches of rain a year. It's true rainforest. It's not true that it never rains in California. And the rainforest is exceedingly difficult to move through. Explorers in tip-top physical condition can take 8 hours to move 1/2 to 1 mile through this forest. It's tough stuff. The coast redwood tree is not to be confused with the other big one, the giant sequoia tree, which lives in the mountains in Southern California, in the Sierra Nevada. And you can see this image of this tree. It's not rainforest at all. It's on a mountainside. So the coast redwood is on the left there, along the coast. The giant sequoias are up in the mountains, just to give you a sense of the geography here. It's a very old species, 20 million years old, I think, whereas the modern humans are about 150,000 years old. So redwoods have been around a long time on the planet, and there's no reason to think that they won't be around long after the human species is gone or changed into something else. Over the course of a 2,000-year lifetime, these trees produce up to 1 billion seeds. The seeds are small. Plant one of those, wait 2,000 years, and you get this. This tree is the lost monarch. It's a huge one. In the 19th and 20th century, about 96% of the redwood forest was cut down in liquidation logging operations that clear-cut the forest. And the biggest redwoods were taken out. So the redwoods we have left are probably, almost certainly, not the tallest and not the largest. They're the remaining 4% of ancient, virgin, primeval redwood forest. That forest is now all protected under the aegis of the National Park Service. But you can see the effect all over Northern California. The redwoods were completely cut, and what you have is a population of young redwoods averaging 30 to 50 years old. And it's going to be a very, very long time before those forests come back. Now, getting around in trees is a matter of climbing with ropes, and you use special tree climbing ropes, special gear which is unique to trees. It's never used in rock climbing, and rock climbing gear should never be used in a tree. Rock climbing gear is lethal in a tree. So if you have any young people who want to try rock climbing gear in a tree, tell them do not do it. And you use special knots. There's a knot right there. It's a really cool knot. Sliding hitch. It's interestingly called the Blake's hitch. It was invented by a tree climber named Jason Blake in 1992. And if you invent a new knot, it is named after you. I don't know if he had any connection to the Blake School. This is our daughter Marguerite climbing, and you can see, one of the things you can see with tree climbing, which makes it very distinct from rock climbing, is the fact that you're suspended in midair on ropes. You can actually climb a tree without physically touching it as an exercise, if you want to do that. And you move on ropes. This rope that I have over here is a redwood lanyard. In the wild trees, I call it the spider lanyard because it works on the exact same principle as Spider-Man's thread. And you sling the rope over branches above your head, you take loops, you make nooses, and then you can hang on a V of ropes and you can move laterally or on diagonals. It's called skywalking. We took our kids up camping in the treetops in a hammock. That's our son Oliver. He's about 50 feet off the ground. I should point out that he is tied in to a harness. He can't fall. His safety rope is right there, and his harness is inside his sleeping bag. So if he were ever to roll out of his hammock, he would just hang in midair. That day when we camped, we were up all night in the trees, and there was kind of a wind blowing. It was in spring. And we came back down to the ground after we'd been on rope for 13 hours, and we were swaying on our feet. You know how sailors, when they get off at the deck of a ship, they feel a little woozy? And my daughter Laura said, you know, what's going on? It's really weird. It feels like the ground is moving. And I said, no, it was the tree was moving all night. You're feeling that. This is our daughter Laura doing something called skywalking, where you go from tree to tree on a V of ropes. You get right out in midair. There she is. She's in the middle of a skywalk, and she's got, you know, quite a climbing kit hanging from her. Laura is a very good tree climber. She's been well trained. Laura and I are on our way to Brazil next month to go climbing in the Amazon. Giant trees there. Skywalking with a spider lanyard, you use these sliding knots and ropes. It's really dramatic and cool. It's a lot of fun to do it. The other thing we did was, of course, when you spend the night in the canopy, you encounter living creatures that don't recognize you as being human. And in the spring, we had songbirds in the morning singing in 3 dimensions all around us, including below us. And they would land right on branches near us, not realizing that we were a threat because they'd never seen a human in a tree before. Forest canopy is anything that you can't touch with your hand when you're standing on the ground. The redwoods are a very serious canopy, really hard to get into. I'm going to skip over this part. Steve Sillett is the main figure in the wild trees. He's a world-class athlete and a world-class scientist. He's a botanist. He is an incredibly skilled and determined tree climber. He has made some epic climbs in the redwoods. When you get up into the redwoods, when you get up into the forest, one thing that Sillett and his scientific colleagues have discovered is that when you stand on the ground, I don't know how many of you have ever been to a redwood forest and seen the trees. What you are doing, in effect, is you are a mouse and you are looking at the foot of an elephant. And most of the elephant is over your head where you can't really see it too well. And redwoods, unlike most trees, actually, as the trunk extends upward, it may go upward 150, 200 feet or more before you get the first limbs. And then the limbs flare out, and the tree actually becomes more massive up in space. You can't tell when you're looking at them from the ground. They look like a pencil. This tree is not a pencil. And it throws out these massive trunks that go up, and then they can interconnect higher up, which is known as a flying buttress, and it's exactly like the flying buttresses on Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. These trees are really like, architecturally, in an engineering sense, they're cathedral-like. Steve climbs a lot with his partner and spouse, Marie Antoine, herself a scientist. They fell in love while they were climbing together and doing research. And Steve and Marie ultimately got married in the redwood canopy. They are reputed to be founding members of a club known as the 300-Foot Club. It's a very small club. I am not a member of it. The Wild Trees describes PG-13, how they did this. It was interesting. Steve, turns out that they had to take off all of their safety gear to do this. And they had 2 hammocks stretched at 300 feet, one like this and one at right angles below, which was the safety hammock, like a net in the circus, in case when they were overwhelmed by passion, somebody fell out of the upper hammock. In theory, the lower hammock would catch you. What happened was they had not spent the night together. And that was when Marie discovered that Steve is a very restless sleeper. And she said to him after a while, you know, Steve, you keep poking me with your knee. I can't sleep. And he goes, okay. And he gets up. He wasn't awake. And he, stark naked and barefoot, he began sleepwalking through this tree at 300 feet. But he's such a brilliant climber that he managed to do this without falling, and then he woke up standing on a branch, and for a moment he had no idea where he was or what he was doing there. And then he climbed down into the safety hammock. So this guy is, he's an interesting figure. To get up into these trees, you fire a powerful compound hunting bow that has a weighted arrow on it, and it's trailing a fishing line. You can see the reel right here. You get the fishing line over a branch, and then you use that to pull a rope. The rope is tactical rope. It's about the diameter of your pinky, and it will run 300 feet straight up the tree, where it then is draped over a strong limb, and then it comes all the way back down to the ground again. And on that hanging end of the rope, you attach climbing ascenders, and you go straight up the rope. And I can tell you from experience that when you're 20, 25 stories above the ground and you're hanging on a rope that's the size of your pinky, even though you know it's a 3-ton strength rope, psychologically it's really hard. You feel like you're in space, in midair, and your imagination begins thinking, what would happen if this rope breaks? Every person on earth has a fear of heights programmed into them. There's nothing you can do about it. It's what keeps us safe. So anyway, you start up that rope. This is Steve Sillett climbing a beautiful tree named Zeus. The trees, all the big ones, have names, and they're largely named after gods and mythical beings. When you're climbing a redwood, this is a titan by the name of Gaia. It's thought to be perhaps the oldest or one of the oldest of the redwoods. Gaia may be 5,000 years old, nobody knows. You have two climbers going up Gaia here. The base of the tree is somewhere a little bit below the image. You can see fire scars here. Gaia burned 500-600 years ago, and the fire scars are still very visible. These two climbers are 15% of the way up Gaia. So use your imagination, and you can take Gaia right up through the roof of this building. When you're looking down Gaia, this is what you see. You feel like you're climbing a wall of wood. We're at about 100 feet, 90 feet actually. Now, I made this panorama to give you a sense of what it really feels like to be on a rope in a giant redwood. You have here, first of all, that tarp is 10 feet wide. There are two large backpacks there. This is the climbing rope. It's barely visible. It's barely visible to you when you're climbing it because it's camouflaged. And you really feel like you're in space. These are the lowest branches on this particular tree, pipe dream. They're very small, feathery branches at about 220 feet above the ground. So it's just a shaft of wood going up. But as you climb, you get into layers of life. There's a lot of life up there in these trees. The tree is covered with lichens. There must be at least a dozen species of lichens on the trunk of this tree, which is named Adventure. And then there are gardens of plants up there. For example, that's a huckleberry bush growing out of the tree. And in late summer and early fall, when they bear fruit, the climbers love to stop and rest and eat the huckleberries. You also have these little tiny moss gardens that are filled with life, including pink earthworms of a species that has never been given a name, that appears to live only in the redwood canopy on the branches. What the pink worms are doing up there, these are big worms. They're the size of the earthworms in your garden. Nobody knows what they're doing there or how they got there. Small crustacea, and then many different species of plants. But that little tiny garden there is at least 600 years old. And the clumsy kick of a climber's boot could knock 600 years of life off that branch. These trees are exceedingly delicate. They're like a coral reef. You try not to touch anything. But it's impossible not to touch things. When you get up into the crown of the tree, you are completely lost in a three-dimensional network where you can't see the sky and you can't see the ground. You're somewhere between heaven and earth. Then when you get to the top of the tree, it breaks out into the canopy. And the taller emergent trees are these spikes that soar above the canopy. Redwoods are aggressive, powerful trees that invest all of their energy and thousands of years of time into trying to get as high as they possibly can, to dominate the trees around them, and to obtain as much sunlight and nutrients as they can, and also to get a very high perch where they can let their seeds and pollen go, propagate themselves. So this is a little example of what I was doing in the redwoods. I'm, of course, a writer. I'm not a scientist. And my job in nonfiction writing is to really understand human beings and to bring the news of extraordinary Americans to the rest of us, people who are not noticed by the news media, who've never really been covered, who often enough tell me that they think they're boring and not worth writing about. I always regard that as a really good sign when somebody says to me, you know, why are you writing about me? I once had two mathematicians, I was profiling them for the New Yorker magazine, and they were quite eccentric. They said to me, Richard, is there any way you could do a profile of us without mentioning our names? I explained to them, no. So you get up in these trees. This is a photograph of me working this lanyard, this particular lanyard here. I'm about 280 feet off the ground, rappelling my way down and doing some scientific work. But a lot of the time what I was actually doing was taking notes and getting dialogue down. When these tree scientists are obsessed with their work, they kind of forget that you're there as a reporter. And I felt like Jane Goodall among the chimpanzees. You know, after a while, she's there with her camera and her notebook, just like me, and after a while, the chimpanzees just sort of forgot she was there, or they sort of forgot, you know, that, you know, they sort of thought of her as one of them when she wasn't. You encounter all this life. The flying squirrels, including in the canopy in New Jersey and Shirley here in Minnesota, are essentially tame. They don't fear humans, they don't know what you are. This was a flying squirrel that my climbing partner Jim Spickler and I encountered about halfway up Helios, which is the world's second tallest tree. She's a female, and she just stared at us. And you can actually go over and you can stroke them between the ears. And when you do that, they close their eyes like a cat. They seem to drift off. And then I was doing this with a squirrel in one of our trees in New Jersey where I live, and it kind of went to sleep for a little while, and then all of a sudden it popped its eyes up and it was like, what is happening to me? And then just soared off into the canopy. And you get up into these massive structures that are out of sight of the ground with hanging gardens of ferns and canopy soil, as it's called, which is the accumulated dust of centuries. And it adds up to tonnage masses of material, soil and life living in these trees, way above the ground. This is a huge mass of ferns known as the Heart of Poseidon. It's in the tree, Poseidon. Steve Sillett and his colleagues have rigged these trees with, Poseidon has, or did have, about 1 mile of data cabling in it. And these trees are wired up like patients in an ICU. The scientists are studying the physiology of these trees and how they dominate the environment. The Redwood Forest is absolutely dominated by the redwood tree as an organism. It changes the chemistry of the soil. It determines how nutrients and moisture are used. And it essentially modifies the environment of these forests to suit itself. And in the course of 1,000 or 2,000 years, these trees produce these extraordinary structures up in space where you really can't see them from the ground, but when you get up into them, you can't believe what you're looking at. Now here's a branch on Gaia tree at 250 feet above the ground, and it looks like you're on the ground. You really aren't. If you did a very careful study of the aggregate of organisms living on this branch, they would not be the same as you would find on the ground. The redwood forest is stratified like a coral reef, and as you go upward into space, you pass zones of life where different species of lichens and different things live. For example, on this branch there are certainly wandering salamanders that live. This is a little spotted salamander that's common in the redwood forest. But the scientists have been studying these salamanders, and they've discovered that a subpopulation of the salamanders is entirely aerial. And a salamander is very territorial, and a salamander will establish itself on a branch, and it will live there for its entire life cycle, and will eventually die on that branch, And then its progeny will then spread out in other places in the tree, claim their own territory, and then stay there for their lives. So it's a population of creatures that are up there. Now, as redwoods grow over time, redwoods know mathematics, and they produce mathematical forms known as fractals. A fractal is a shape that repeats itself at smaller and smaller scales. And as these trees grow, they throw out limbs, and then the limbs sprout vertically with perfectly vertical trunks that go straight up into space. And then they in turn throw out limbs that throw out trunks. Now, Iluvatar, which is one of the most massive of the redwoods, turns out as the scientists studied the tree and mapped it, they found it had 6 levels of trunks, a total of 220 trunks. So again, we are not talking about pencils here. We're talking about something that is just an extraordinary, charismatic organism. It's as beautiful and weird as blue whales. Down there is a human. Can you see that little picture? That's for scale. Now, the next image is you're going to see an image of the interior of Iluvatar, its crown. And there we are. This is a beautiful drawing done by Andrew Jocelyn, who illustrated the wild trees. There are 5 humans in this picture. There's one, another, 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 and that is a flying buttress. That's a branch that is fused between a subsidiary trunk, that's a vertical trunk of Iluvatar going straight up. It threw out a limb, and that limb merged like silly putty with the main trunk. Flying buttresses hold the crown together. There are several of them. There are a couple there. That looks like a flying buttress. They knit the crown together. It's a kind of a work of natural engineering. When you get up to the tops of these trees, you see this beautiful assemblage of life. Now, the top of Gaia tree, which is at 320 feet, the top blew off in a storm around 1400 AD. So around the time of the English poet Geoffrey Chaucer, the top of Gaia blew off. Gaia might at one point have been the tallest tree in the world, but as redwoods age, they do the same thing that humans do. They lose their hair, they get wider, they get a little thicker, also they get more interesting. This little garden that you're looking at, which is about 8 inches across, to give you some scale, took 600 years to form between the day of Geoffrey Chaucer and today. As the tree slowly rotted, these life forms colonized. But it takes that long for life to appear in a little pocket in a redwood. The soil, the canopy soil, is filled with these organisms, copepods. Copepods are a crustacean. They're very small. They're all through the redwoods in the canopy. The other place that you find copepods in vast numbers is in the open oceans, where they are a major component of plankton, and they are the major component of the diet of baleen whales, including the blue whale, which graze on these copepods in vast numbers and suck them in through their baleen. What this organism is doing in the redwood canopy, nobody knows. And there's so many other things to investigate that the scientists have not even been able to get around to giving this thing a name. They don't know what it is. It's an undescribed species that's up there, like many others, just waiting for a young scientist to come along, as I said to the Blake students, and do what is known as primary exploration of the Earth. In other words, there are parts of the Earth that have still never been visited by humans, where the living things that you encounter there don't yet have names. And to me, it's beautiful and wonderful that here in the 20th century, the Earth remains at some fundamental level still unexplored. Scientists believe that about 40% of the species on Earth live in forest canopies alone, never visit the ground, and have essentially never been identified by humans. Science is really not about what we know at all, but it's what we don't know. And it's about mystery, and it's about solving mysteries. And as I said to the Blake students, you know, scientists, what really drives them, what really motivates them, is not you know, being rich or famous or anything else. It's that experience of going into nature, looking very carefully, and then asking questions. And if you ask the right questions, if you're a scientist and you have a nose for what questions could be asked and what could be answered, what you are doing is you're like working a combination lock on a safe, and you have no idea what's inside that safe. Might be something beautiful and gorgeous, or nothing at all. And you have no idea how to open that lock, but you have an idea, you think you know. And there's a moment in the career and the life of a scientist where they've managed to crack a safe, and they open that door and they see something in nature that nobody has ever seen before. They see something going on in the world, and the way the world works, the way nature works. And it's like getting a little glimpse of God in a sense. You're seeing something. This is the high that scientists get. This is what motivates people to do this kind of work. This is what has motivated Steve Sillett to risk his life on many an occasion to get a better look at what's going on in nature. So it's been a pleasure to talk with you about all this today, and I would welcome any questions, if you have any. Yes, sir. How does this tree not fall over? Sir, are you a structural engineer? There must be some engineers in this room. This is a really good question. You just asked a really cool question. This is super cool. The question is, from the point of view of a structural engineer, how can this organism stand up straight, right? How does it do this? And then they're not falling over. Okay, I'm glad you asked that question. There's a really interesting answer to this question. And it's also answered in the book. The redwood as an organism does not have a taproot. The root system of a redwood is a mat of tiny hair-like roots that extend as much as at least 100 meters in every direction away from the tree. And the tree is rooted in this mat of fine roots, okay? Now, as long as that tree is balanced perfectly straight, those roots are like ropes that they keep that tree straight. Redwoods grow essentially forever. But there comes a point in the life of a redwood, the redwood may be 500 years old or 2,000 or whatever, when there may be a little disturbance in the soil, there may be a big windstorm, and the tree will start to lean just a little bit. And down at the base of the tree, there are unbelievable tensile forces operating on that root structure. Once a redwood begins to lean, it is doomed. It is doomed to fall. So these beautiful organisms that live for a couple thousand years, they all die instantaneously. They all die when they fall. It would be as if your doctor told you, well, your life expectancy is about 2,000, but you will certainly die of a sudden heart attack. They die instantaneously. And Steve Sillett, before he understood this, climbed a leaning redwood with a climbing team, one of the world's tallest trees. It was a real serious leaner. And when the storm hit the tree, it began rocking in a very strange, peculiar way, and they began hearing cracking sounds. And it was middle of the night, they had only one exit rope, and they realized that they were trapped in the tree, and the tree was getting ready to fall. And they had an absolutely terrifying night in this tree. It was like being in a ship that's foundering. And they thought they were going to go down with it. They survived until morning. They got out at first light. And then a few weeks later, one of their colleagues went back to the forest to check on that tree, and it had fallen. And when it fell, it hit wet soil, and it threw a curtain of spray 60 feet in the air in all directions. Pieces of soil the size of basketballs were hurled 100 yards, and the part of the tree where they had been camping was 10 feet underground in the mud. And Steve Sillett said that if we had been in that tree when it fell, they would have had to yard us out of 10 feet of mud by pulling on our ropes. And they would have yarded up human body parts. There wouldn't have even been an attacked body there. So yeah, so that was an interesting question. Yes?
I'm aware of I think we all are aware of the kind of touristic thing that's going on in Mount Everest, where anybody with a really big checkbook can get on an expedition, and now there are traffic jams during the climbing season on Mount Everest. Is there this kind of thing going on in these forests too, where people who really are not that qualified but can hire a guide or something and go up and mess around with trees?
Yeah, the question of amateur climbers in redwoods, getting into the redwoods like they do it on Mount Everest. This is another really interesting question. The scientists are really scared of this, really scared that it could start happening. However, the US federal government now controls the permitting process for climbing in redwood trees, and all of the big trees are protected. And as of now, the National Park Service issues only a very small number of permits, only for people doing scientific research and only for certain periods of the year and for certain trees. And, but there's a lot of concern about what is known as ninja climbers. There's a certain culture in tree climbing of just, if you see a beautiful tree, just climb it. Don't ask permission, because the answer will be no, right? And there have been ninja climbers in the redwoods. In the book, I don't disclose the locations of any of these endangered trees. That's an old tradition in botany. You never disclose the location of a rare or delicate plant, because rare and delicate plants and humans don't get along together, and the humans always win and the plant always loses. So there have been attempts to find Hyperion, the world's tallest tree. Outside Magazine, it was discovered in 2006, and then the first climb of Hyperion, I was a member of a 4-person climbing team that did the first ascent of Hyperion, measuring it, 2006. Afterwards, Outside Magazine, we didn't disclose where the tree is. And not even the Park Service rangers knew where the tree was. Only 6 or 7 people, 10 people probably at most. But Outside Magazine sent a team of experienced outdoorsmen to search the Redwood Forest and try to find Hyperion. And they came back empty-handed. They never found it. And I heard later from Steve Sillett that these 2 idiots walked right underneath Hyperion and didn't know what they were looking at. Yes? Is pollution having a noticeable effect on the trees? Well, the question of global climate change is a very big question for the redwood scientists and for all of us who love redwoods. For the moment, the redwood forest seems to be doing just fine with global climate change. They've been measuring, the Earth's atmosphere has higher levels of carbon dioxide in it now. Redwoods like carbon dioxide, and on average, these trees seem to be growing a little bit faster. However, the redwood forest is also drying out because it's getting warmer and drier, and the forest is prone to burning. About every half a thousand years, the redwood forest burns to a crisp, and only the biggest trees survive these big fires. So there's a lot of concern. The redwood species is not likely to wink out, although we don't know. We don't really know what the future holds for the individual trees. Yes, sir?
Regarding fires, I was told once that the pod, the cone of a redwood, is actually opens up after a fire, or that the actual will cause it actually requires it to actually begin growing. Is that true?
Do the cones open up after a fire? That is true of the giant sequoia tree that you saw, but that's the other species. The coast redwood, the cones don't do that. One of these trees will produce 1 billion seeds over the course of a long lifetime. And of those seeds, on average, only one will become another big redwood. And they germinate constantly, and you can go through the Redwood Forest and you can find there are all these little tiny redwoods popping up, you know, head high. If you cut them, start counting the growth rings, you might find a tree that's 2 inches in diameter and 200 years old. And what they do is they come up, they're little, and they just wait. And they can wait, nobody knows how long they can wait, but they can wait indefinitely in low light. They can stay alive with almost no light. And then if a big tree falls and opens up a gap of sunlight, then these things will shoot for the sky. They're patient trees. Yes, sir. Is the canopy ecosystem as delicate as coral reefs? The answer in redwoods is yes. The rule for scuba divers is don't touch anything, because if you touch the coral, it can die. The redwoods are the life is a little bit more rugged than that. You can touch stuff and it isn't going to die. But it's only too easy to knock a lump of moss off a branch just by kicking in the wrong direction. I was detailed an assignment to take all the scientific gear out of a tree named Rhea in the Atlas Grove. And I rappelled down through the tree. And I got into a place where limbs had fallen off and then gotten hung up in the tree. And there was a cave underneath these hanging limbs. So I crawled into the cave and underneath the limbs, and I found myself in a patch of ferns and then this very delicate heaps of moss. And I felt very guilty doing this. It was the only way that I could get down out of the tree. And the goal of that particular climb was to remove all traces of human influence in that tree. Take everything out of the tree, and then let it rest and remain wild, become wild again. And Steve Sillett told me that I would be the last person to climb that tree in our lifetimes. He said, I'm never going to climb that tree again. You never will. No one ever will. Yes? With the redwoods? The redwoods are a silent reminder of the different flow of time for humans versus the redwood trees. And climbers speak of tree time and redwood time. Redwood time is measured in a huge, long, slow arc of time. In comparison to the life of a redwood, human life is a blink. It's an instantaneous blink in time. And I've seen branches at the tops of redwoods that are about the size of your thumb that with a magnifying glass have 50 growth rings in them. These trees near the top hardly change over time, over our lifetimes. And they have, not only do they remind us of the brevity of our own lives, but they also remind us of things that we have that redwoods don't have. And although we exist in a blink of time, we have the capacity to wonder, which a tree does not have. And we have the capacity to ask questions. And we also have the capacity to love, which a tree doesn't have. And we have the capacity to love our children and to preserve the redwoods as a legacy for them so that they, in turn, will have the opportunity to ask questions about the world and about the redwoods.
Unfortunately, we don't have redwood time, so I think I'm going to have to cut you off. But Richard will be around for another 50 or so if you have any questions.
Be happy to chat with you later.
Absolutely.
Right now.
Richard, thank you very much.
Richard, you talk to these kids and hopefully you'll inspire some of them. I'm sure that you will. What's interesting to me, and I didn't put this together until right now, and that is that my son, who is now a sophomore in college and an environmental science major, had his entire since the magazine came out, National Geographic did an article. You may very well have written it. I should go back and look. There was a fold-out of a redwood tree. It had about 18 people, as I recall, standing in the tree. You got it? on the ceiling above his bed. He went to bed looking at it every night, and here, these years later, he's now going into the study of the outdoors, the environment. So I know you influenced at least one kid, and probably many more today. We appreciate it. So thank you very much for being here. Join us next month, May 15th, when David Mortensen tells us all about the new Vikings stadium. So have a great day, and thanks again for joining us for breakfast with us.